Hello, QVS AP US History students. I hope you're having a good yet productive weekend. I wanted to talk to you today about how we are going to move further into Essential Unit 3. This is one of the most important units of all of the US history units as it involves the creation of the country. Last week, you examined the Articles of Confederation and the organization of the U.S. Constitution. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to understand why the country transitioned from the Articles of Confederation, from a decentralized Confederate model to a more centralized model under a federal system that was designed in the U.S. Constitution. Also, too, it was important last week to really take a look at the U.S. Constitution to understand the different parts from the preamble that recognizes the fact that it's a living document and that the country can always and will always improve to the 7 different articles of the Constitution, which explain the structure and function of the U.S. government from the legislative, executive, and judicial branch to how to amend the Constitution, which couldn't be done to the Articles of Confederation, or it could be done, but it was nearly impossible because all 13 states had to agree unanimously. So the articles and how to amend the Constitution, and along with the amendments, the Bill of Rights, namely, that were added almost immediately after the ratification of the Constitution in 1791. The Bill of Rights outlined all of the rights and privileges of the American people that would be protected within the context of the U.S. Constitution. So last week was really important. Make sure that you take the time to finish that web quest on the Constitution if you have not done so already, because I want to take the rest of today to talk about how we are going to move further. You're going to see when you get to the course page that there are only 2 assignments for this week, but they are hugely important, and I will discuss them, and even I have a PowerPoint that I will put on the page and share with you as much as I can in these next 15 minutes to get you familiar with the first 2 presidencies of the United States under George Washington and John Adams. So let me take you to the course page. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll show you where those 2 activities for this week are, and then I will take you to my PowerPoint presentation. So clicking on the tab for Essential Unit 3, if we scroll down to week number 4, okay, because these are the activities that you did last week. In week 4, these are the 2 activities that I am referencing. We're going to take a look at the presidencies of George Washington and John Adams. When you open this activity, you're going to see that there are many videos to help support your understanding of those first 2 presidencies. So I would encourage you to watch all of them. None of them are more than like 10 or 15 minutes in duration, so you should be able to have time to watch all of them. And then at the end of the activity, there is this worksheet right here that you will complete, because for each of the 2 presidencies, I want you to outline the accomplishments and struggles. So what were some of the good things that happened during George Washington's presidency? Now, I want you to pay attention to the dates here, 1789 to 1797. I don't want you to talk about an accomplishment for Washington being that he was the leader of the Continental Army. That wasn't one of his presidential accomplishments. I want you to examine what were some of the accomplishments that were achieved during his administration as president. Same with struggles. I don't want you to tell me that he was defeated during the French and Indian War by the French at Fort Duquesne. I want you to talk about struggles that Washington had during the context of his presidency. Same with John Adams. So John Adams became president in 1797, and you should examine the accomplishments and struggles of John Adams. There's lots of websites on the course page to help you learn about those 2 presidents and some of the important features of each of their administrations. Then on the second page of this worksheet, I want you to rate them. I love rating. events in history, and even the effectiveness of leaders. So I want you to rate them in these 1, 2, 3, 4 different categories. To what extent did each of them safeguard the liberty of the people? To what extent did each ensure equality among the people? Rate them on the effectiveness of their domestic policy and the effectiveness of their foreign policy. The ratings between 1 and 5, 1 being most effective and 5 being least effective. And then finally, there are some questions here for your overall analysis. So of the 2 presidents, which do you think was the more effective of the 2? That's question number 2. What were the factors that influenced you and the determination that you made? So that is this activity here. And then this next activity is really important because it deals with Alexander Hamilton. So when George Washington became president, he created the cabinet. So the president has a number of advisors. The presidential cabinet today has since increased in size, but back then the cabinet had a Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense. And it just so happened that Alexander Hamilton became the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, and Thomas Jefferson became the first Secretary of State. The 2 men were adversaries. They did not like each other very much, and you can learn about that in this activity here on Hamilton's policies. Both of them had very different visions on the future of the country. This is a fun little song you can listen to from one of the popular musicals in the United States at the time, but it kind of like outlines the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson in terms of how they wanted to direct Washington toward a more productive economic policy for the country. Alexander Hamilton was a Federalist, and he believed in a strong centralized government. Jefferson questioned that, and he wanted policies that were more favorable for the agrarian future of the country. You know, and it kind of makes sense based on just the general nature of the 2 men. Alexander Hamilton lived most of his life in New York, a very urban area, while Jefferson lived most of his life in Virginia on his plantation in Monticello. He profited largely off of slavery. So kind of like their background helps you understand the vision that each of them had for the country. Hamilton believed that the future of the country was industry and a merchant-based system, and Jefferson believed quite the opposite, that the future of the country was agrarian. I can't get that word across, that it was more agricultural in nature. And Hamilton's plans kind of favored the idea of creating a more merchant market-based economy because he advocated the construction of a central bank. He advocated the assumption of national debt by the federal government, and he also advocated a tax on whiskey that became very controversial and actually led to rebellion in the young country. So in this activity, you will learn about Hamilton and Jeffersonian policy, and then there is an assignment right here for you to do. So let me take you to that, where I kind of outline the issues between Hamilton and Jefferson, like their view on the general public, their view on how people should be governed, so on and so forth. And ultimately what I'm getting to is who do you agree with the most in terms of the future of the country? Do you believe that Hamilton's vision or Jefferson's vision was more suitable? You have to say why, and then you have to give me 3 substantial relevant reasons. Okay, so that is what we are doing this week. We are taking a look at the presidencies of George Washington and John Adams. Now, before I set you on your way, let me show you the PowerPoint. I don't know that I'll get all the way through it, but let me introduce it to you, and then I will put it on the course page. Okay, so looking at the first two presidencies, the presidency of Washington and Adams, you're going to see that there was from the very beginning, a split between two groups of people, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Like I said, Jefferson and Hamilton represented the two different sides here. And in the split, it kind of from the very beginning put the country in a position of tenuous nature as it related to how policies were going to be passed. So you had these two groups, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. They even argued over the Constitution. The one way that the Federalists appeased the Anti-Federalists with the Constitution was through the issuance of a Bill of Rights. So there was a struggle for ratification. You can kind of see it in this map here. You can even pause to take a look at the different dates that the different states ratified the U.S. Constitution and where the divisions lied within each state. In order to make this a reality, Alexander Hamilton had authored a number of papers called the Federalist Papers, and among them he talked about the danger of political faction and the importance of checks and balances. So we can have a strong centralized system as long as there is a separation of powers and that the three powers check and balance each other. Ultimately, they ended up adding a Bill of Rights. So I would tell you at this point, press pause so you can read through all of these rights, because I'm not going to list them off for you. But they did add a Bill of Rights. James Madison was largely responsible for writing them. The two important ones within the context of all of them was the Ninth Amendment, which includes like all of the rights that can't possibly be written in the Constitution, and the 10th Amendment, which establishes that federal system in the United States. So pause and pay attention to these different rights that were included in the Bill of Rights. During Washington's administration, he won unanimously, and John Adams became his vice president. I talked about the cabinet that he created, and following through from there, one of the most important things that he did was the Judiciary Act of 1789. It really gave more meat to the Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which outlined the judicial branch. And you could look at the difference between the judiciary system in 1789 versus 2019 with this map here. Alexander Hamilton drew up a financial plan during Washington's administration, and press pause and take a look at the different components of his national plan. He wanted to make sure that he could establish credit for the country so that they could survive and effectively trade with other nations. He wanted to create a national bank. They ended up doing this. It had a 20-year charter. And he wanted to assume debt so that the country could move further and not be burdened by the debt that it had accrued during the Revolutionary War. The debate really dealt with the rights of government officials under the Constitution. As Hamilton was a broad constructionist, Jefferson was a strict constructionist. Hamilton really played off of Article 1 and the necessary and proper clause. He argued that there were implied powers in the Constitution that gave him the right to create a national bank. I also mentioned the whiskey tax that he put in place to help pay off the debt. This whiskey tax ended up leading to rebellion because people did like to drink alcohol. So when their liquor was taxed, they got very upset. Washington's response to this rebellion is interesting because like Shays' rebellion, the response was very heavy-handed and very controversial. During Washington's administration, he emphasized the importance of only running for 2 terms. At the end of his second term in office, he gave some warnings to the American people, ironically, not to entangle themselves in foreign affairs and to watch out for partisanship in political parties that lead to sectionalism and secession. I'm going to let this video end, and I'm going to pick up from this slide on a part 2 video because there's some relevance to his warnings and what's going on in the country today. So I'll pick up in the second video that I'm sending you today.